Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. We're going to get into the discussion of where things stand with Iran and what some of the options are. But since there was that contretemps between Trump and Bibi over the ceasefire, Trump earlier in the week none too happy with Bibi for launching strikes against Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon. And as we discussed, the reports of the exchange between the two on the phone indicated that Trump was, quite distressed to the point of using profanity and, basically saying to Bibi, like, look, you fly in formation, you would be in prison if it wasn't for me, words to that effect, reportedly. And there was compliance, and then when there was compliance, Trump posted on Truth Social, hooray, I just talked to Bibi, the ceasefire is back on, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Of course, it's not back on for Hezbollah, which continues to engage in violence, but that's the approach that Trump wants to take. But since that difficult call between the two, seen a resurgence of the silliness. Claims like Tucker Carlson made recently that there's a genocide going on in Gaza, and sort of cheerleading for there to be a break between Trump and Bibi, between the United States and Israel. Many of the usual suspects saying the usual fact-free things. So I just wanted to address that before we got into it, and no better than to cede my time to Florida Federal District Court Judge Roy Altman, who was on with Brian Kilmeade recently on Fox, and addressed this claim because it has resurfaced that, yes, what happened on October 7th was a horrific terrorist attack, but trying to provide false moral equivalence, those who are, ignorant, anti-Semitic, some combination of the two, have made the claim that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. The sorts of reckless statements you would hear from like an AOC or Rashida Tlaib, but that are being popularized online. Judge Roy Altman.
There's no doubt that Israel's war in Gaza was not only not genocide, it was the least likely urban conflict in modern history ever to meet the standard legal definition of genocide. And you don't have to take my word for it. The high-level military group, the HLMG, which is a collection of all the high-level officers and generals from almost all the Western democracies in the world, not just the United States. These people aren't Jews. They have no connection with Israel. They're just generals in militaries around the world. They wrote a report and a brief to the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which says that Israel's civilian warning system, which is a warning system where Israel tells the civilian population of Gaza exactly where it will be striking the next day, and then provides humanitarian corridors for them to leave those zones, and even in Al-Mawasi, in the southwestern part of the Strip, created an entire new city for them, where it provided food purveyors, medical clinics, polio vaccines for 1.2 million people. The HLMG says not only is that completely incompatible with genocide, not only is it completely incompatible with what any other country has ever been willing to do for the civilian population of the enemy in warfare before, but they say it's also something our own democracies would never be able to do, because our civilian populations would never stomach endangering the lives of our own soldiers, our own sons and daughters, by warning the enemy of where those sons and daughters will be. And by the way, it's taken a very heavy toll. Over 800 Israelis have been killed in Gaza precisely because they warned the civilian population to get out of harm's way, and they sent those soldiers into homes home to home that Hamas had the time to lay an ambush at and to booby trap and fill with
And John
IEDs.
Spencer, the president of the War College at West Point, said the same thing. He went and visited 5 times, and he said they actually were more humanitarian-oriented than even we were at Fallujah and Mosul.
So if you want to make the claim of genocide, you go ahead and make that claim, but do so on the merits. Respond to what Judge Altman said. Respond to what John Spencer from West Point said and saw and witnessed on the merits. See how well you do. And I don't care if you're Tucker Carlson or you're just some crank online. And you want to have an understanding of what Israel is dealing with and what we, by extension, are dealing with when it comes to Islamists. This seems particularly relevant on a day when a good buddy of the World Trade Center bombing 1.0 just made it through the primary to be a member of Congress from New Jersey. And some on the right have their foci a little discombobulated when it comes to threats to the West. You want to understand it? I share this anecdote from Leland Vittert, friend of the show. You know, he's a host on News Nation. Well, before he was at News Nation, of course, he was a Fox News foreign correspondent. And he shared this story in an interview with Barry Weiss about the experience he had that led him to an understanding of the region.
I said, wait a second. These people treated you in all of your burns. They saved your life, and you'd want to blow them up. And she goes, absolutely. Wafa had been a woman in Gaza. She had pulled a pot of boiling water over herself when she was like 5 or 6 years old. The Israelis treat most of the people out of Gaza who have really catastrophic medical injuries. She goes back to Gaza after being treated for 4 or 5 years in Israel. She gets recruited to be a suicide bomber. And she'd been given 3 target options by the Alaska Martyrs Brigade: a bus, a cafe, or the hospital that had treated her and saved her life. She chose the hospital that had treated her and saved her life. She gets to the checkpoint. They discover that she has a bomb. She tries to detonate it. It doesn't go off. She gets thrown in jail. Again, the Israelis treat her. They help her with her burns. They educate her. They give her a college degree. And now in the Gladstone deal, she goes back to Gaza. So I go to Gaza to interview her, thinking this is going to be a redemption story. So I get into Gaza, and I bring with me an iPad that has the video of her trying to blow herself up. And I show her the video. And I said, what are you thinking watching this? She goes, oh. I'm thinking I almost tasted paradise. Okay. Would you do it again? Absolutely, in a minute. This is my calling in life. I said, wait a second. These people treated you in all of your burns. They saved your life. You tried to blow them up. They still treated you. They educated you. And now you have a chance at life back here in Gaza. And you'd want to blow them up. And she goes, absolutely. And that's when my mind was made up about the moral clarity of the Israeli-Palestinian debate.
For more on this and other matters, Ruthie Blum joins us. She is former advisor to the office of Netanyahu and co-host of Israel Undiplomatic. Ruthie, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
So the disagreement that apparently occurred earlier this week between Trump and Bibi, how much importance should we give to that? How much importance do you give to it?
Well, I give more importance to the fact that it was leaked and than the actual content of it. And the reason is that we know, listen, throughout history, you could say that Churchill and Roosevelt had, disagreements. Of course they have disagreements. Right. But whoever leaked that conversation had ill will both towards Israel and to the United States, both to Bibi and to Trump. All right, that's first of all. And whoever that was should be fired, in my opinion. We shouldn't have to know about the tiff between Bibi and Trump. We need to know the bigger picture. And up until now, the bigger picture has been an amazing partnership in trying to rid the world of this Islamist threat from Iran that has been a threat for 47 years. Okay? And President Trump is the one who has been saying that all along. about ridding them of their nuclear capabilities. And Netanyahu as well, for decades, has been warning about that. And, of course, there are proxies across the region. And that regime has got to go. Now, it's true that President Trump never said that regime change was one of his goals of war. It's just that with that regime in power, it would be very, I would say, impossible to make any kind of deal other than total surrender. But, of course, they won't do that because, like the woman just described in Gaza, who wanted to taste paradise, that's who these people are. And therefore, no, you cannot make a deal. The West cannot make a deal with forces like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because Marco Rubio essentially said that in a Senate committee hearing yesterday. He basically said, look, if it was up to the people, the professional set in Tehran, the people who protested back in January, the people that wear suits and are westernized, Persians, that there would already be a deal made. But that's not who we're dealing with. And it's like, well, right. So that's not who you're dealing with. So then, it strains the bounds of credulity to believe that a deal is in the offing that is enforceable. And so I can understand where disagreements would arise between allies about strategic approach.
Exactly. Now, it's possible, we don't know, but it's very possible, even likely, that the disagreement wasn't about the goal, and it wasn't that they disagreed that the regime, over the let's say, character of this regime, but rather over the strategy.
Yeah.
Now, what we're seeing is that President Trump was putting extreme economic pressure and continues to put economic pressure on the regime. Here's the trouble, though. A regime like that doesn't care if its people starve or are, slaughtered in the millions. As long as it survives, just a remnant survives, and then they consider that a victory. And here is where I'm not sure that President Trump fully grasped that perception in the Middle East matters so much, okay? Because he's right that he destroyed their army and the Navy and killed the leadership, not just he, but together with Israel. He's absolutely right. What he's wrong about is that in itself means victory with people like that. And the Iranian people are the victims here, and that brings us to Lebanon. The same with the Lebanese people who are under the thumb of Hezbollah. Now, Marco Rubio, when he explained that about Hezbollah, he's totally right. And when the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, says something similar, he's also absolutely right. But then I ask you, so why are we negotiating with Lebanon in Washington? Why are Israeli representatives and Lebanese representatives negotiating in Washington when they're on the same page about Hezbollah, and yet the Lebanese government is saying Israel has got to get out of Lebanon, rather than saying thank you so much, Israel, for doing this job, taking care of Hezbollah when we are too weak and too afraid to do it. So there is where I'm puzzled, and I'm puzzled at the policies of the Trump administration because, yes, they get it. But if they get it, then what is the point of negotiating? And with whom are you negotiating?
Yeah, something that a scholar we had on the other day said I thought was an important distinction in terms of thinking that if you squeeze them long enough, just strictly economically, economic fury combined with the blockade and so forth, that you'll if the conditions worsen, then that will foment this revolt that's bubbling below the surface. And what he said is that there's not necessarily a revolt bubbling below the surface. What Iran has been experiencing is long-term decay, and that decay now is hastening. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a revolt is around the corner. And frankly, and this has been something that nobody seems to be able to put their finger on, at least, or can't publicly in the case of people with more knowledge. Who and what would be the that would provide the foundation for any such revolt and toppling of this regime? That seems to be completely unclear.
Well, exactly. And especially if you look at Syria and you see that that's fantastic. The Assad regime, that evil regime fell. But now it's in the hands of, ISIS terrorists who claim to have reformed, but, we'll believe it when we see it, okay, because we see evidence that that's not the case. Now, that's all true what you say. Here's the thing, though, I think about the Iranian people. They did take to the streets in January.
Yeah.
They were slaughtered en masse, and they were willing. They even said so. They're willing to take hardship, economic hardship, all kinds of hardship. And as long as President Trump, who said help is on the way, as long as help came. And in fact, it did. On February 28th, Trump and Israel, they launched Epic Fury. And the Iranian people were very encouraged by this. And President Trump said, just hold on a minute before you take to the streets again. It was too dangerous, okay, really too dangerous. And they weren't armed. And the arms that were supposed to get to them didn't get to them, etc. But they were still encouraged that with more pressure on the regime and more military pressure, they would then be safe enough because so many of the besieged militias and the Revolutionary Guard heads were knocked out. The trouble is that suddenly Trump announced a ceasefire many weeks ago, more weeks than the war took. And then Iran started also bombing the Gulf states, and they saw that, maybe the United States isn't really the strong horse protecting us. And so they began to say, well, maybe you should stop the war. On the one hand, they wanted to defeat Iran, and on the other hand, they were afraid they didn't have a partner anymore. So I think that the Iranian people are just despondent now and are disappointed in Trump when previously they were cheering him on, and they were, they had posters of Trump, and they were celebrating him and Bibi, by the way. And now they're very, very worried, and I think rightly so. They know their regime a lot better than Trump does.
And, I guess my bottom line question, does anything substantively happen in the direction of reopening the strait and obtaining the enriched uranium? These are must-haves for the president. I'm just going by what he said are must-haves. Does anything substantive happen in either of those directions without a resumption of the use of force?
I don't believe so, okay? And I'm not a military expert, but I don't see any way out, because when he says that, okay, look, these are our red lines, this is what you've got to do, and they say, no, we'll sign a memorandum of understanding and then 60 more days of ceasefire, and then we'll discuss your uranium, et cetera, okay? And then the memorandum, and then they keep upping. They said, okay, we'll stop firing on Kuwait or on Bahrain if it stops being friends with Israel in the Abraham Accords, things like that. They keep adding. Now, in my book and throughout history, one thing we know is that it's the loser that should be suing for peace. The victor shouldn't be begging the loser to come to the table, right? And up until now, we all believed that that's what was happening. And Trump was very proud, and rightly so, proud of the accomplishments and proud of the victories. And then suddenly it all stopped. And he keeps talking about negotiating as though it's a real estate deal. And he is brilliant at that. But this is not quite the same thing. And on the other hand, in fairness, he did say, if they don't step up to the plate, we're going to have to bomb them again. Now,
essentially,
obviously, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
He did say it. He said it many times. The one thing that worried me that he said in the interview with Laura Trump on Fox News on Saturday night, I believe it was.
Yeah.
He said, look, we're negotiating. They're tough negotiators, but they at least agreed they agreed to give up their nukes or not to develop nuclear weapons, is what he said. And when I said to them, yeah, but what about purchasing nuclear weapons? And they said, okay, we won't purchase nuclear weapons. The reason that worried me is that for decades they've said we never wanted nuclear weapons. We're not developing nuclear weapons. So in other words, that statement is not a concession to President Trump.
Well,
They've maintained
yes.
that throughout the years.
Right. Well, I mean, the other thing, too, is if we agree to not develop nuclear weapons, or what about purchasing? Okay, we also agree to that. So, if you don't take that as a holistic statement, well, what about bartering for nuclear weapons? Okay, we agree not to barter. I mean, you're not exactly operating in good faith, clearly.
Right. Well, of course, you see, these people do not operate in good faith, and we know that.
Yes.
That's not their goal. These are not Westerners. And they're not even, I'll tell you something, they're not even Muslims, moderate Muslims of any kind. This regime, from the get-go, and by the way, even the more, you know how people talk now about how it's confusing who's in charge in Iran, and that you have the hardliners and the pragmatists and all this. But make no mistake, those are all hardliners. They all have the same goal, which is death to Israel, death to America, and subjugating the West. They all have that goal. The difference is in the, let's say, strategy to get to that goal. And so when we talk about moderates, and it's almost as though when we talk about the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, right, we'll say, AOC, she's in the radical wing of the Democratic Party. You can't talk about the regime in Iran in those terms. They are all radical.
Can't really talk about the Democratic Party in this country in those terms anymore either, but that's a different story. Ruthie.
Actually, you're right.
Ruthie Blum, former advisor to the office of Bibi Netanyahu, co-host of Israel Undiplomatic. Ruthie, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
And thank you for having me down.
And she joined us on the alphawealthgroup.com answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
With so much financial uncertainty, are you wondering if your retirement savings will last? The market ups and downs can keep you guessing, especially if you're approaching retirement or considering it. Hi, I'm Edward Jones financial advisor Nolan